October 9th, 1943. A hayfield near Varde, Denmark. Hans-Werner Lerche stood in morning mist, studying the massive American bomber that had settled into Danish soil like a wounded bird. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, designated Miss Nonalee II, sat surrounded by tall trees, its 4 Wright Cyclone engines silent, German soldiers forming a perimeter around 35,000 pounds of American industrial power that had just fallen into Luftwaffe hands. Lerche, a Hauptmann and chief test pilot at the Rechlin evaluation facility, had received the telephone call 3 hours earlier. Another flying fortress had made a forced landing. Intact, flyable, the propeller pitch on one engine had failed during a mission, freezing in takeoff position, forcing the bomber to leave its protective formation and seek emergency haven in enemy territory. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. This was not the first American heavy bomber Lerche would fly for the Luftwaffe. It would not be the last. But what he and his fellow German pilots would discover through hundreds of hours testing captured Allied aircraft at Rechlin would prove more devastating to German confidence than any battlefield defeat. The Americans had built a war machine that German intelligence had insisted was impossible. And every captured bomber, every intact fighter, every piece of American equipment told the same inescapable story. Germany was fighting an industrial giant it could never match. The morning of December 12, 1942 had marked the beginning of this revelation. Lieutenant Paul Flickinger piloted B-17F serial number 4, 1-24585, call sign Wolfhound, during a bombing run against the Rouen-Sotteville Railroad marshalling yards in occupied France. His aircraft belonged to the 361st Bombardment Squadron of the 303 Bombardment Group, stationed at RAF Molesworth in Huntingdonshire, England. The 303rd Bomb Group, known as Hell's Angels, had only recently begun combat operations. On this December morning, the group furnished 20 B-17s for a mission targeting Luftwaffe servicing facilities 60 miles east of Paris. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s attacked the American formation with aggressive determination. Machine gun and cannon fire tore through Wolfhound's fuselage and wings. One engine died, its propeller windmilling uselessly in the slipstream. Another began losing power, smoke trailing from damaged cylinders. Flickinger fell behind the protective formation as his crippled bomber struggled to maintain altitude and speed. The other B-17s continued toward England, unable to slow without making themselves vulnerable to the swarming German fighters. Attempting to reach England across the Channel meant certain death for a damaged bomber unable to maintain formation. Flickinger made the only decision that offered his crew any chance of survival, an immediate emergency landing on enemy-controlled soil. Through breaks in the clouds and smoke from his damaged engines, he spotted what appeared to be a suitable field near Melun, France, approximately 60 miles southeast of Paris. With remarkable skill, considering his aircraft's damage, Flickinger brought the massive bomber down for a wheels-up landing in a hayfield. The B-17 slid across grass and mud, its ball turret guns scraping earth, ploughing a long furrow before coming to rest. The 10-man crew emerged with hands raised, prisoners of war. What they didn't expect was how valuable their intact aircraft would become to German intelligence. Within hours, Luftwaffe ground crews and Wehrmacht soldiers swarmed over the captured fortress. Engineers photographed every system, every structural detail, every technological feature before the bomber could be damaged by souvenir hunters or sabotage. The bomber represented an intelligence windfall beyond anything previously captured. Most downed Allied aircraft arrived in pieces, scattered across fields and forests, their secrets buried in twisted metal and broken components. But Wolfhound sat nearly intact in a French field, a complete example of American heavy bomber technology, ready for systematic exploitation. German recovery specialists immediately recognized the extraordinary prize before them. This was not just another crashed bomber to be stripped for scrap metal. This was the first B-17 Flying Fortress to fall into Luftwaffe hands in flyable condition. The capture represented an unprecedented opportunity to study American heavy bomber design, construction methods, defensive armament, and operational capabilities. German technicians worked rapidly to transport the damaged but repairable bomber to Leeuwarden Airfield in the Netherlands, a major Luftwaffe base developed from a pre-war Dutch Chivel airport. 2 days after capture, on December 14, 1942, German mechanics completed temporary repairs to the battle damage. Fuel tanks were topped off with German aviation gasoline. German national insignia replaced American markings on wings and fuselage. Large black crosses adorned the wings. A swastika marked the tail. The distinctive colours of Nazi Germany announced the bomber's new ownership. 2 Messerschmitt Bf-110 heavy fighters took position as escorts, and a hand-picked German crew climbed aboard for the ferry flight to Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's premier testing and evaluation centre, located approximately 50 miles north of Berlin in Mecklenburg. The flight plan was distributed to every Luftwaffe fighter base and flak battery along the route with explicit instructions: do not engage the captured fortress. But despite these precautions and the clear German markings, some Luftwaffe forces fired on their own captured prize, inflicting minor additional damage before recognition signals could be confirmed and the attackers called off. The incident highlighted both German eagerness to destroy American bombers on sight and the difficulty of coordinating operations across fractured command structures in a military organization beginning to feel the strain of fighting on multiple fronts. When Wolfhound touched down at Rechlin after its circuitous flight from the Netherlands, it entered a world dedicated to understanding enemy technology. Rechlin served as the central testing facility for all Luftwaffe aircraft evaluation, Germany's equivalent to the United States Wright Field in Ohio or the British Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough. Every captured Allied airplane that could be repaired to flying condition eventually made its way to this secretive base. Here, German engineers dissected foreign technology, searching for weaknesses to exploit and innovations to copy or counter. The facility employed hundreds of technicians, engineers, test pilots, and support personnel dedicated to the single mission of understanding how enemy aircraft worked and how to defeat them. The Rechlin facility itself occupied a vast area centered on 2 large turf-surfaced airfields bounded by roughly hexagonal perimeter roads. The main facility covered approximately 234 hectares, with no clearly defined runways in the modern sense. Aircraft could take off and land in any direction the wind favoured. Satellite facilities at nearby Rogentin and Lerche expanded the testing capacity. Buildings for officers and specialists clustered around the main airfield. Enormous hangars lined the shores of Lake Müritz. Engine test stands, a power station, control towers, ammunition dumps, and a sprawling refueling system supported continuous operations. By 1943, Rechlin had evolved into the Reich's most important aviation research centre. For 3 months following Wolfhound's arrival in mid-December 1942, the bomber remained grounded while teams of specialists conducted exhaustive examination. Engineers removed panels to study structural design, marvelling at the sophisticated stressed skin construction that gave the B-17 its legendary toughness. They measured skin thickness, analysed alloy composition, tested rivet patterns, and joining techniques. The American approach to aircraft construction differed fundamentally from German methods. Where German designers favoured complex structures built to precise tolerances, American engineers had created simpler designs, optimized for mass production, with acceptable tolerances that facilitated rapid manufacturing. The defensive armament particularly fascinated German analysts. 9 heavy-caliber Browning Mudvar machine guns, each capable of firing 750 rounds per minute, created interlocking fields of fire covering virtually every approach angle. Later, B-17 variants would mount 13 defensive positions, transforming the bomber into the most heavily defended aircraft in the world. The ball turret beneath the fuselage rotated through 3. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. 360 degrees, allowing the gunner to track targets anywhere below the aircraft. The tail gunner commanded 2 50-caliber machine guns, protecting the vulnerable rear approach. Waist gunners covered the sides. Top turret and nose positions completed the defensive sphere. German intelligence had consistently underestimated American industrial capacity and technological sophistication. Luftwaffe briefings had assured fighter pilots that American bombers were poorly defended, that their formations could be broken up through determined attack, that German fighters possessed clear superiority in speed, firepower, and pilot skill. The reality sitting on the Rechlin tarmac contradicted 3 years of comfortable assumptions. In March of 1943, Hans-Werner Lerche received orders to begin flight evaluation of the captured Flying Fortress. Born in 1914 in Posen, Lerche had been fascinated by aviation since childhood. Economic hardship following World War I had made his path to flying difficult. His father died in 1919, forcing the family to relocate to Breslau when Posen became Polish after the war. His mother worked as a librarian, supporting 4 children on a modest salary and pension eroded by post-war inflation. Young Lerche built flyable glider models, progressed to full-sized gliders, earned his pilot's license, and became an instructor. Hitler's rise to power brought new opportunities for aviation enthusiasts. The secretly rebuilding Luftwaffe needed pilots and engineers. Lerche's combination of flying skill and engineering education made him valuable. By 1943, Lerche had established himself as one of Rechlin's most experienced test pilots. He had flown dozens of German aircraft types, from sleek single-seat fighters to heavy multi-engine transports. But flying captured Allied aircraft presented unique challenges. No pilot's manuals existed. No training programs prepared German pilots for American or British designs. Everything had to be learned through observation, intuition, and sometimes dangerous experimentation. Lerche approached Wolfhound with methodical care. He studied the cockpit layout, noting the unfamiliar arrangement of instruments and controls. He examined the engine start procedures, the fuel management system, the electrical systems. He consulted with engineers who had been documenting every detail for months. The first flight required extraordinary concentration. Without a pilot's manual or operations handbook, Lerche had to deduce proper procedures from the physical evidence before him. The B-17's cockpit differed dramatically from German bomber designs. American engineers had emphasized ease of operation and crew coordination over the rigid efficiency favored by German designers. Controls fell naturally to hand, instruments were logically arranged. The layout suggested that American designers expected their aircraft to be flown by rapidly trained pilots with varying levels of experience, not the highly skilled specialists the Luftwaffe cultivated. Lerche advanced the throttles for all 4 Wright Cyclone engines. The bomber's nose lifted as it accelerated down Rechlin's grass surface. At the calculated rotation speed, Lerche eased back the yoke. The Flying Fortress rose smoothly into German skies, 35 tons of American engineering responding to controls with surprising docility. The bomber handled well, more stable than comparable German designs. The turbocharged engines performed excellently at altitude, exactly where strategic bombing required sustained power. The superchargers were activated by exhaust-driven turbines that became increasingly efficient at higher altitudes, precisely when more power was needed most. This technical sophistication impressed German engineers struggling to match American high-altitude performance. Over subsequent flights, Lerche explored the B-17's capabilities systematically. He tested maximum speed, service ceiling, rate of climb, turning radius, single-engine performance. He evaluated the defensive armament, noting blind spots and firing arcs. He assessed stability during simulated bombing runs. Every flight generated detailed reports, documenting American design philosophy and engineering execution. The testing revealed capabilities that exceeded Luftwaffe intelligence estimates. The Flying Fortress could absorb extraordinary punishment and continue flying. Its redundant systems provided multiple backups for critical functions. Battle damage that would destroy German bombers often merely degraded B-17 performance without catastrophic failure. Most significantly, the defensive firepower transformed aerial combat equations. 1350 caliber machine guns in later variants, created a defensive sphere that forced German fighters to attack at angles where they themselves became vulnerable. The interlocking fields of fire meant that approaching the bomber from any direction exposed the attacking fighter to multiple gun positions. German pilots who had previously attacked bombers individually now faced the reality that formations of B-17s could generate such concentrated defensive fire that losses among attacking fighters often exceeded bombers shot down. The implications extended beyond tactical considerations. Wolfhound's very existence posed uncomfortable questions about American industrial capacity. German intelligence had insisted the Americans could not possibly manufacture such complexity on an industrial scale while fighting a global war. Yet here sat proof that they could. The sophisticated turbo superchargers, the precise manufacturing tolerances, the advanced materials all suggested an industrial capability far exceeding German estimates. The captured fortress coded DL+XC by German forces represented only the beginning. As the strategic bombing campaign intensified throughout 1943 and 1944, more Allied aircraft fell into German hands. Some crashed with repairable damage, others landed intact due to navigation errors, mechanical failures, or fuel exhaustion. Each captured aircraft made its way to Rechlin, where Lerche and his fellow test pilots faced the daunting task of flying enemy machines without manuals, without training, relying solely on engineering knowledge and flying intuition. October 9th, 1943, brought Lerche back to Denmark, to that misty hayfield near Varde, where Miss Nonalee II waited. The B-17 F serial number 42-3, 0336 from the 385th. Bombardment Group had attempted to reach Sweden with mechanical problems, but came down at Norrholm Mark instead. 1 crew member evaded capture, 10 became prisoners of war. But the bomber sat intact, surrounded by tall trees, presenting Lerche with an immediate challenge: how to extract a massive 4-engine bomber from a confined clearing with no runway. Lerche walked the field, measuring distances with his eyes, calculating minimum takeoff run against available space. The trees formed a natural barrier on all sides. Any miscalculation meant destruction of the valuable prize and possible death for himself and his crew. He studied wind direction, ground surface conditions, aircraft weight. He calculated power requirements and rotation speed. The margin for error approached zero. German ground crews had completed temporary repairs to the mechanical problems that forced the landing. Fuel tanks held sufficient gasoline for the short flight to Esbjerg airfield on the Danish coast. Everything depended on Lerche's ability to coax the bomber into the air from an impossibly short field. He advanced the throttles to full power, holding the brakes until all 4 engines screamed at maximum thrust. The bomber strained against the brakes like a leashed animal. Lerche released the brakes. The B-17 lurched forward, accelerating across the uneven field surface. The trees rushed closer with terrifying speed. The bomber's tail lifted. Airspeed built agonizingly slowly. Lerche held the yoke steady, waiting for flying speed, fighting the temptation to rotate early. At the last possible moment, he pulled back. The bomber clawed into the air, clearing the trees with mere feet to spare. Another American heavy bomber had become German property. Miss Nonalee II, assigned the German code 7+8, flew to Rechlin for full evaluation. Engineers swarmed over the bomber, documenting every system, comparing it to Wolfhound and other captured B-17s. The similarities confirmed that American manufacturers had standardized production to an extraordinary degree. Parts were interchangeable across factories. Manufacturing processes had been refined to achieve consistent quality at high production rates. The Americans had solved problems of mass production that German industry still struggled to address. By mid-1943, Rechlin operated a small fleet of captured Allied aircraft. Besides multiple B-17s, the facility had acquired consolidated B-24 Liberators, British Avro Lancasters, Supermarine Spitfires, North American P-51 Mustangs, Republic P-47 Thunderbolts. and Soviet aircraft including Yakovlev fighters and Ilyushin attack planes. Each type received systematic evaluation. Lerche flew them all, accumulating experience with enemy aircraft that few pilots in any air force could match. His logbooks documented flights in over 120 different aircraft types during the war. The variety of captured aircraft revealed something profound about Allied production capabilities. The Americans weren't just building aircraft in large numbers, they were building multiple types simultaneously: heavy bombers, medium bombers, light bombers, fighters, transports, each in quantities that suggested industrial capacity beyond anything Germany could achieve. North American Aviation, for example, manufactured AT-6 trainers, B-25 Mitchell medium bombers, and P-51 Mustang fighters simultaneously. No German manufacturer approached that level of production, diversity, and volume. Captured P-51 Mustangs particularly impressed German evaluators. The fighter, coded J-9 plus CK, arrived at Rechlin in its original olive-drab camouflage scheme. German test pilots found the Mustang's performance exceptional. Its Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine provided excellent power across all altitudes. The aircraft combined long range with superb maneuverability and high speed. The laminar flow wing design reduced drag, extending range and improving performance. German fighter pilots encountering Mustangs over the Reich discovered that the Americans had finally fielded an escort fighter capable of protecting bomber formations all the way to targets deep in Germany and back. The implications were strategic. Prior to the Mustang's introduction in large numbers during 1944, German fighters could avoid heavily defended bomber formations and attack when escorts reached their range limits and turned back. The P-51 eliminated that tactical option. American bombers now enjoyed fighter protection throughout their missions. Luftwaffe losses climbed dramatically. The daylight strategic bombing campaign that had seemed vulnerable to determined defense became increasingly unstoppable as American fighter escorts achieved numerical and qualitative superiority. Testing captured aircraft revealed Allied design philosophies that contrasted sharply with German approaches. American and British engineers favored simpler designs optimized for mass production, ease of maintenance, and operational reliability. They accepted slightly reduced performance in exchange for enormous production advantages. German engineers pursued technical perfection, creating sophisticated aircraft with excellent performance but complex manufacturing requirements and difficult maintenance needs. The Me-109 fighter, for example, required skilled mechanics and precise adjustments. The P-51 Mustang could be maintained by less experienced ground crews with simpler procedures. One of Lerche's most dangerous exploits occurred in August of 1944, when he flew a captured Avro Lancaster over Berlin to test experimental night fighter radars. The four-engine British heavy bomber had been restored to flying condition at Rechlin after forced landing in German-controlled territory. Luftwaffe night fighter forces desperately needed effective radars to counter RAF Bomber Command's nocturnal offensive. Testing required flying the Lancaster at operationally realistic altitudes and speeds, while German radar operators attempted to track and target it. The mission proceeded routinely until the Lancaster's radio failed shortly before an incoming RAF raid. Lerche found himself piloting a British bomber over Berlin during an air raid, unable to communicate with German air defense forces. Even the large German crosses and yellow undersides, marking the Lancaster as a test aircraft, would provide little protection in darkness against German night fighters hunting for British bombers. Lerche had to navigate through his own nation's air defense system while RAF bombers swarmed overhead, hoping German radar operators would recognize the test flight before ordering fighters to attack. He descended rapidly, departing the altitude where bombers typically operated, hoping to signal his aircraft's special status through unusual flight profile. German searchlights swept the sky. Flak bursts erupted around the bomber. Fighters prowled nearby. Lerche maintained heading toward Rechlin, flying low and fast, praying his aircraft's German markings would be recognized before a night fighter's cannon ended the test flight catastrophically. After 30 agonizing minutes, he reached Rechlin's circuit and landed without clearance. the Lancaster's tires screeching on the grass runway. Ground crews rushed to the aircraft, shocked to see a British heavy bomber landing unannounced during an air raid. The incident demonstrated the extraordinary risks test pilots accepted when flying captured enemy aircraft in combat zones where their own forces might destroy them, but it also highlighted the desperate measures Germany pursued to counter Allied bombing. Testing captured aircraft provided invaluable intelligence about enemy capabilities, but that intelligence increasingly confirmed uncomfortable realities about Allied industrial and technological advantages. By November of 1944, captured Allied aircraft had graduated from pure testing roles to operational missions. Kampfgeschwader 200, or KG-200, a secretive Luftwaffe Special Operations Unit, began incorporating captured B-17 and B-24 into clandestine missions. The unit's history began in 1934, when the Luftwaffe, impressed with Oberst Theodor Roevel's aerial reconnaissance missions over Poland, formed a special squadron attached to the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence department. As the war progressed, KG-200 evolved into Germany's equivalent of modern special operations aviation units. The unit carried out especially difficult bombing and transport operations, long-distance reconnaissance flights, and covert missions behind enemy lines. Due to Germany's lack of heavy aircraft with sufficient range, captured American B-17 and B-24 became invaluable assets. These bombers could fly farther than German aircraft and, critically, could operate over Allied territory without immediately attracting attention. A B-17 formation flying over England or a B-24 crossing the Mediterranean aroused no particular alarm from Allied defenders. The captured bombers wore their original markings for these missions, becoming the Luftwaffe's equivalent of stealth aircraft. KG-200 operations included dropping agents behind enemy lines, resupplying German forces cut off by Allied advances, transporting important personnel, and conducting long-range reconnaissance missions. On November 27, 1944, KG-200 pilots Brown and Pohl flew a Junkers Ju-290 transport from Vienna to a position south of Mosul, Iraq, where they successfully airdropped 5 Iraqi parachutists in bright moonlight. The crew returned to Rhodes, demonstrating the extraordinary range of special operations the unit attempted. Captured B-17 proved particularly useful for these missions. The bomber's long range allowed flights deep into Allied-controlled territory. Its familiar silhouette provided natural camouflage among genuine American formations. Several captured fortresses received German military codes, while retaining American markings and paint schemes for maximum deception. One B-17, coded A3+FB, landed in Manises Airport near Valencia, Spain on June 27, 1944, where Spanish authorities interned it. The aircraft had been conducting a clandestine mission, possibly agent insertion or reconnaissance, when mechanical problems forced the landing. The operational use of captured bombers revealed both German desperation and ingenuity. With Allied air superiority increasingly absolute, German forces needed every advantage to continue operations. Captured aircraft provided temporary solutions to critical capability gaps, but they also highlighted fundamental problems. Germany lacked the long-range heavy bombers that America produced by the thousands. German industry couldn't match Allied production rates. German logistics couldn't support diverse aircraft types operating globally. Each captured American bomber represented not just an intelligence prize but proof of industrial capacity Germany could never match. The Americans demonstrated production capabilities that defied German comprehension. Boeing, Douglas, Lockheed, North American, Consolidated Republic, and other manufacturers produced aircraft at rates that would have required Germany's entire aviation industry working at maximum capacity. Yet the Americans did it while simultaneously producing tanks, ships, trucks, artillery, and millions of tons of other war material. The arsenal of democracy had mobilized completely, and its output overwhelmed Axis forces through sheer volume. Lerche's test flights at Rechlin documented this disparity with brutal clarity. Every captured aircraft revealed sophisticated engineering executed with precision manufacturing. The turbocharged engines that gave B-17's high-altitude performance exceeded German technical capabilities, despite years of research. The hydraulic systems that operated defensive turrets demonstrated reliability German engineers struggled to achieve. The electrical systems, the fuel management, the structural design, every aspect spoke to industrial maturity and manufacturing excellence. The defensive firepower particularly haunted German fighter pilots. 13 50-caliber machine guns on late-model B-17s created kill zones that destroyed attacking fighters before they could press attacks home. Formation tactics multiplied this advantage. A combat box of 18 B-17s could bring 234 heavy machine guns to bear on approaching fighters. The interlocking fields of fire meant that attacking one bomber exposed the fighter to defensive fire from multiple aircraft. German fighter pilots who survived early missions learned to respect the Flying Fortress's teeth, but respecting enemy capabilities and countering them effectively were different challenges. German fighter tactics evolved to exploit B-17 blind spots, particularly head-on attacks where the bomber's nose guns offered relatively light defense until later variants added chin turrets. German pilots learned to attack in pairs or larger formations, concentrating fire to overwhelm individual bombers quickly. They developed specialized anti-bomber cannon, including 30mm and even 50mm weapons that could destroy bombers from beyond defensive gun range. Yet these tactical innovations couldn't offset strategic disadvantages. For every B-17 shot down, American factories built 3 more. For every German pilot who mastered anti-bomber tactics and survived 20 missions, 10 novice pilots died on their first or second combat mission before learning effective techniques. The average life expectancy for German dayfighter pilots by 1944 measured in weeks rather than months. Many never achieved 10 combat missions before being killed or too badly wounded to continue flying. The Americans, meanwhile, implemented systematic crew rotation policies. Bomber crews completed tour requirements of 25 missions initially, later increased to 35 as loss rates declined. Survivors returned to training commands in the United States where they passed hard-won combat experience to new crews. This created institutional learning that preserved lessons purchased with blood. German practice flew pilots until they died, were captured, or became physically unable to continue. Every pilot capable of flying combat missions stayed on the line indefinitely, leading to declining average experience levels across fighter units. Miss Nonalee II, the B-17 Lerche had extracted from that Danish hayfield, was assigned to KG 200 but crashed near Bad Voslau during a transfer flight to Vienna on August 28, 1944. The aircraft was salvaged and transported to Wiener Neustadt for repair, but the work remained unfinished when Soviet troops arrived in March of 1945. Wolfhound, the first intact B-17 captured, served Germany until destruction in April of 1945. During more than 2 years of service, it taught German aviators and engineers volumes about American bomber design, defensive tactics, and industrial capabilities. But these lessons proved intellectually valuable while remaining strategically irrelevant. Understanding enemy advantages doesn't eliminate them when resources don't exist to create counters. The 13 machine guns that so impressed test pilots at Rechlin represented not just defensive armament, but American industrial philosophy made tangible in metal. Overwhelming firepower through volume of fire, mutual support through formation tactics, redundancy through multiple weapon systems covering all approaches, all designed to ensure enough bombers survived each mission to destroy targets and return home to fly again. This philosophy worked despite heavy costs. Nearly 5,000 B-17s were lost to all causes during the war, including combat losses, operational accidents, and weather. Casualty rates among bomber crews exceeded 20% in some units during 1943. German fighter opposition shot down hundreds of fortresses in determined resistance, yet the strategic bombing campaign succeeded. Germany's war industries were destroyed, its cities burned, its transportation networks collapsed, and when the war ended, American factories were still building B-17s at rates that would have allowed complete replacement of all combat losses within 6 months. The Rechlin test facility itself became a target as Allied intelligence recognized its importance. British and American photo reconnaissance aircraft identified the concentration of captured Allied aircraft at the base. The distinctive yellow undersides, painted on test aircraft for identification, made them visible in aerial photographs. Allied planners understood that Rechlin represented the nerve center of Luftwaffe aircraft evaluation and development. Destroying it would blind German intelligence efforts and eliminate critical testing capabilities. Throughout 1944, Allied bombing raids struck Rechlin with increasing frequency and intensity. The primary turf-surfaced aerodrome absorbed repeated attacks. The satellite field at Rogentin suffered similar treatment. German defenses struggled to protect the facility against massive formations of American heavy bombers escorted by swarms of fighters. Each raid destroyed hangars, damaged aircraft, killed experienced personnel, and disrupted testing operations. The Luftwaffe shifted late-war aircraft testing southward to Lerche, attempting to preserve some evaluation capability as the Reich contracted under Allied pressure. Lerche continued flying throughout this period, his logbooks documenting an extraordinary variety of missions. In May of 1943 alone, he flew Messerschmitt Bf. 109 fighters, conducted overload takeoff tests with Ju-52 transports, evaluated captured American bombers, and tested experimental German aircraft. Few pilots in aviation history have flown such diverse types under such demanding conditions. His ability to transition between aircraft without manuals, training, or preparation demonstrated exceptional skill and engineering knowledge. The captured aircraft revealed not just American technological capabilities, but fundamental differences in military-industrial philosophy. The United States had embraced total mobilization, converting its massive civilian economy to war production with remarkable speed and efficiency. Automobile factories built aircraft, appliance manufacturers produced ammunition, shipyards that had built commercial vessels launched aircraft carriers and destroyers at unprecedented rates. The coordination of this industrial transformation represented organizational achievement as impressive as any technological innovation. Germany, by contrast, had entered the war with insufficient industrial capacity and never fully mobilized its economy until far too late. Ideological constraints prevented full employment of women in factories. Reliance on slave labor created inefficiencies and sabotage problems. Competing priorities among military services, party organizations, and industrial cartels fragmented production efforts. Albert Speer's appointment as armaments minister in 1942 brought improvements, but by then, Germany faced enemies with combined industrial output 10 times greater than its own. The captured B-24 liberators at Rechlin told similar stories to the Flying Fortresses. These 4-engine bombers used different design approaches, high-mounted wings, tricycle landing gear, Davis wing with high aspect ratio, but achieved comparable performance and payload capacity. The Americans had developed 2 completely different heavy bomber designs and manufactured both in enormous quantities simultaneously. Germany struggled to produce sufficient numbers of even its standard bomber types, while American factories delivered B-17s and B-24s by the thousands. Lerche's flights in captured liberators revealed aircraft optimized differently than Flying Fortresses but equally effective. The B-24's longer range made it valuable for Pacific operations where distances between bases stretched across thousands of miles of ocean. Its somewhat higher cruise speed and better fuel efficiency compensated for slightly greater vulnerability to battle damage compared to the rugged B-17. American commanders could choose which bomber type suited specific missions best, a luxury German commanders never enjoyed. Soviet aircraft captured on the Eastern Front provided another perspective on Allied industrial capabilities. Yakovlev and Lavochkin fighters, while less sophisticated than American or British designs, were produced in staggering quantities and proved effective in their intended roles. The Soviets had evacuated entire factories eastward beyond the Urals, reassembled them, and resumed production under conditions that would have paralyzed less determined nations. The Ildwa-Sturmovik ground attack aircraft, built by the tens of thousands, gave Soviet forces devastating close air support capabilities despite relatively simple construction. Testing these Soviet aircraft demonstrated that the Allies approached aviation from multiple directions simultaneously. American and British bombers attacked by day. British bombers struck by night. Soviet aircraft dominated the Eastern Front through numerical superiority and tactical innovation adapted to that theatre's unique conditions. Germany faced not one air force but multiple air forces, each operating according to different doctrines, each supported by vast industrial bases beyond German reach. The cumulative weight of this evidence ground down German confidence systematically. Every captured aircraft, every intelligence report, every analysis of Allied production capabilities pointed to the same inescapable conclusion. Germany had challenged enemies whose combined resources, properly mobilized, could not be defeated through military action alone. The strategic situation had become hopeless by mid-1944, though the fighting would continue for nearly another year at horrific cost. Lerche and his fellow test pilots understood these realities with painful clarity. Their detailed reports documented Allied advantages across every measurable parameter, but understanding the problem and solving it diverged impossibly when Germany lacked the industrial capacity, the raw materials, the fuel, the time, and increasingly the skilled personnel to counter Allied supremacy. The captured aircraft at Rechlin had taught their lessons well. Those lessons simply couldn't change outcomes determined by industrial capacity and national will. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.